reality. And then the third one is the mountain of mistakes. You've ever had someone just continually list up a mountain of everything that you've ever done wrong in your life, and then as soon as something little happens, you just explode, and that person releases it all onto that person? Maybe you're that person this morning. I'm talking to you, because you tend to hold grudges. You tend to stuff it in. And then as soon as someone it's like a whole bunch of bark in a pile with some gasoline on top, and all I gotta do is put a little bit of a match underneath, right? And it whoosh, it lights up. You just unload. You just toxically vomit all over that person. You know what I'm talking about this morning. This keeping a record of mistakes. Maybe people have done that to you your whole life, and maybe you've learned that to do that with other people because you haven't wanted to hurt them, so you just stuff it all in, and then boom, it just comes out with a little bit of spark, this mountain of mistakes. I'm going to teach you a couple things that Jesus did that shows us what he did to love completely, the last days of his life. Let's continue on. Next slide, please. Number one, the rope of acceptance. The rope of acceptance. If I was a climber climbing a mountain, what does every climber have? A rope. They're tethered to somebody else. They're tied and they're linked to somebody else. In this rope of acceptance, what happens is we need to work together. If I go one direction, you need to follow. If you go one direction, I need to follow. If we're pulling at each other, easily we can fall off the cliff. If you decide to untie yourself from the rope, what also happens is you are running the risk of falling because no longer are you secure by working together in teamwork, this rope of acceptance. Let's look at this passage, what Jesus did in John 13, 2-5. It says, the evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around them. Jesus, who is God, Jesus, who is the King of the universe, comes down and tries to teach his disciples a concept of what love is all about, this rope of acceptance. Because notice who Jesus, when he gets down and begins to wash his disciples' feet, it's the job of a Gentile, somebody who was not Jew. It was the job of a door servant. And because people didn't have shoes back then, people walked around on sandals, and people would have had to been traveling long distances, and their feet would often get dirty. And so a Jewish culture was they often took baths in the morning, but by the end of the day, it was their feet that tended to be dirty. And so going into a meal such as dinner time, they would enter in, and there was no servant at the door. And so Jesus begins to see that there's something going on with his disciples, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so he gets down on his knees and says, you know what? Instead of you guys washing each other's feet, instead of me just going off and working on my sermon, going off and studying or praying in the corner, I'm